Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Lunch was good? Hey, everyone. My name is Andrei. I'm going to be talking to you for the next 40-ish minutes about mastering the madness, essential skills for turbulent times. Let me tell you a little bit about myself so you understand how my perspective on this thing is. My job is a leadership consultant. I work with managers, I work with individuals, I work with teams, and I work with companies, and I help them be better. So I focus a lot on this kind of human potential aspect of things, how people can be more effective through their skills, not necessarily their technical skills, but all their other skills. So this is a time when I'm going to warn you, this is not a technical presentation. If that's okay, let's continue. And I've been doing this for about 10 years. I work a lot with IT companies. Before that, I was a manager in an IT company. And before that, I was a software developer. So that's kind of my background. But these days, I'm completely focused on this idea of how can we do the best we can and not get stuck in the things that inhibit us from achieving our potential. And I know it sounds a bit guru-ish and vague, but I think it's going to be interesting. Why do I say essential skills in turbulent times? Because we live in a period where there's a lot of change, right? I mean, I don't need to tell you. 3/4 of this conference is about AI and how AI is going to change everything, right? We all know that. The way in which things used to work in the past was a more stable way. So people had the luxury of learning one thing or a few things well, and then doing that for a long period of time. And doing that in a very narrow and specific sense, because you had managers that told you exactly what you needed to do, and it just did it. And that doesn't work anymore. And I think all of us need a certain level of ability to deal with this change and this unpredictability, regardless of what our job is. So I'm not talking to you in case you want to become managers or anything like that. I'm talking to you regardless of what you're doing. I think anyone needs these things. Let's get going. Today, I want to talk to you about how to be smart, how to be strong, and how to be creative. I think these are the essential skills for turbulent times. And I'm not telling you this because I am smart, strong, or creative. I try. But I'm telling you this based on all my work with probably thousands of people that I've done, and the common things I've identified, and the things I see that work, and the things that I see that don't work. So let's take them one by one. How to be smart. How do you think you become... I don't know why I pressed. How do you think you become smart? Anyone?
You learn.
Yeah, you read, you said, you learn. Anyone thinks you're born with it, and that's it? You're either smart or stupid? It's fine if you think that. Don't worry. There's a lot of people who look at smartness as a kind of a fixed quantity thing, like you are where you're not. You can nurture it a little bit, but maybe not a lot. I don't think that's the right perspective. I think we can become smarter. So let me start with this quote from Machiavelli. Right? There's no presentation without a quote from The Art of War, or in this case, from Machiavelli. And Machiavelli said in his book, The Prince, that there are 3 kinds of minds. The mind that is capable of understanding for itself, the mind that is capable of understanding from others, and the mind that is not capable of understanding anything. And the first is of the highest excellence, and the second is awesome, and the third is useless. And I think that's kind of right. But I structured it a little bit differently, a bit more granularly, and a bit more using modern language and modern science. And I think there are 4 levels of understanding, basically. So if you think about any individual, yourself, relative to any situation, how well do you understand that situation? By situation, I mean a problem you need to solve, a technology you need to use, a group of people you need to interact with and come to a conclusion, any kind of situation you might be in. How well do you understand that situation? And I think there's 4 levels of understanding. Ignorance is the first level. You know nothing. Sometimes you know nothing. Sometimes you don't know nothing. And that's the most dangerous situation. The second level is what I call isolated statements. We know a few things, we can make a few true statements, but they're isolated. Then we have quantitative understanding, and then we have situational understanding. So let me give an example. Simple example, right? Very simple. Winter tires, all-season tires, summer tires. How well do you understand the differences between these kinds of tires? I'm not saying you have to, but let's take it as an example. Ignorance is someone who doesn't think about these things, doesn't know anything about them. They just drive the car. If they're lucky, nothing happens, or someone else takes care of this for them and nothing happens. If they're unlucky, they're going to get stuck in winter or have a crash or get a fine. That's ignorance. It's fine. Sometimes you can afford to be ignorant. On many issues, most of us are ignorant on most things, right? Like, from all the things in the world, most things we're ignorant. That's fine. The key is deciding where not to be ignorant. Then you learn a little, and you can make isolated statements. And you say things like, all-season tires are somewhat good in summer, somewhat good in winter, but not as good in summer as summer tires, and not as good in winter as winter tires. That's a true statement, right? But in itself, it's meaningless. It's almost meaningless, because you have no scale, and you have no numbers. And then we get to quantitative understanding, where you can say things like, the difference in performance between a typical all-season tire and a typical winter tire is about 20% in braking distance on packed snow. But on ice, there's another difference in performance. And now, and only now, you kind of begin to really understand something, because you can make an informed decision. And when you get to the ultimate level, which is situational understanding, is not only you understand about tires, you have a sense of scale and proportion, you understand your situation, what you're going to use them for, your own skills, and you can put them together, and you can make the best decision for a given circumstance. And now you really understand something. This is where you can also innovate. This is where also you can take chances. Like, winter tires are better, but you decide you don't need it because you're good enough or because we don't have winters anymore, one of the two. And this very simple example is how we approach any given situation, right? Let's imagine somebody at your job asks you to do something you have not done before. You're in one of these situations, usually, higher in the hierarchy. The key is understanding where you are. The biggest problem that I see is people don't know what they don't know. What happens when we're ignorant? When we're ignorant, we typically overreact to bits of information. You know nothing about something, and one colleague gives you one piece of advice, and that advice is everything to you. That's your entire knowledge. So you do that thing, or you Google something, or you ask ChatGPT something. You're very easy to be manipulated. You're very easy over-exaggerate things and take things out of context. When you know a little bit, this is the most dangerous area. This is where you get overconfidence. Some of you may have heard about the cognitive bias of Dunning-Kruger. Anyone heard about Dunning-Kruger? So Dunning-Kruger is a psychological phenomenon where people who know a little bit about something are very confident, and they say, yes, I know, I can do it. And people who know a lot about that something, they have a lot of questions and a lot of doubts. So if you don't know, and you talk to two people, and you ask him, and he says, I'll do it, and you ask her, and he says, I'm not sure, but she may know a lot more than him. And he is a victim of Dunning-Kruger. Apologies for the example. There's a statistic that says that most serious accidents happen to drivers between month 6 and month 12 after they get their license. In the beginning, they're careful, because it's really difficult. So they're careful because they have to be careful. And then they get a little bit of skill, but they get a lot more confidence than skill. So their confidence is a lot higher than their skill. And that's where they make the most mistakes. And this is here. And this happens in everywhere, in everything. Like, we all know, if you're software developers, how juniors underestimate everything. Like, they learn a little bit and everything takes a week. Nothing takes longer than a week, right, if you ask them. Because they don't think about all the aspects, because they're just not aware of them. And then you get to quantitative understanding, and you know a lot more, and you have a contextual understanding and have a bigger picture. But the risk here, you get rigid. This is like the senior who is very fixed in their ways. They know how to do it, and that's the only way to do it, right? Because we as people like to know things. We like to be able to solve problems. So when we finally get the skill and we put in the hard work and we're able to solve problems, we just cling to that way of solving problems and we don't do anything new because new is difficult. And when you get to situational understanding, you get into a comfort zone. Everything is so easy. Everything just happens by itself. Why would I try anything different? So it's even more than that. And this is how you get stupid. Paradoxically, by getting smarter, you can get stupider if you fall into these traps. So what should you do? Well, when you're ignorant, first thing is to know that you're ignorant. And do some research or ask for help or delegate to someone who knows that, how to do that thing. When you know a little bit, be careful and understand that you know a little bit, but there's a lot you don't know. And again, do some research, ask for help, consult someone. When you know a lot, the dangers are different and you need to try new things and put yourself in positions that are uncomfortable for you. And when you know even more, realize that at some point you just got to change things just to keep your mind fresh. So if you do the same thing, you're just going to get stuck in that. So sometimes you have to disrupt things for the sake of disrupting things. My definition of intelligence is self-awareness plus curiosity plus preparation. So, people who are not intelligent are people who are, for example, not self-aware, even if they have a very high IQ. They don't know that they don't know, they have a lot of opinions, but they're not even aware if those opinions are valid or not, or if they did the necessary amount of research. I would much rather work with a person, in most situations, not all situations, but in most situations, I would much rather work with a person who has an IQ of 110, but is self-aware and prepared, rather than a person who has an IQ of 140, but is arrogant and unprepared. Functionally, most of the times, the first person is smarter than the second. Functionally, in the sense, the ability to get shit done. If you have them have a chat, this one is going to seem much more clever. They're going to be more charming, they're going to be quicker, they're going to say more interesting things, but when it actually gets to getting stuff done, the first individual is usually, most of the times, going to be much more productive, much more effective. Now, if you're really, really, really clever and also prepare and are self-aware, good for you. Congratulations. But I see this a lot, right? I really see this a lot. It's talent is almost a curse sometimes. People who are talented, what does talent mean? Talent means that they're good at something without having had to work a lot for that something. For whatever reasons. Maybe just a native thing to them, or maybe they got good at it when they were young and they didn't even realize they were getting good at it. But now it just comes easy for them, right? It's easy for them to write code, I don't know. And talent is an advantage that can easily become a curse because they're not used to putting in the work. They're not used to preparing, they're not used to failing, they're not used to overcoming that failure, so they don't do it, so they get stuck. So they're very impressive in the beginning, and then they get stuck. And this is a big one. I see this a lot. Something to be careful about. My tip on how to get smarter is to count to 5. Does it make sense? Of course not. It's kind of a joke. But what I mean is, what is count to 5? Well, is that old saying, like you're in a conversation, someone says something, you want to say something, breathe and count to 5 before you say something. So it's this idea of self-reflection and self-awareness. That before you do something, before you say something, before you jump into something, take a moment and think, okay, what am I doing here? What is this? How prepared I am? Should I research a little bit more? Do I need some help? Or maybe I don't. But think about that. And that is going to help you a lot in becoming smarter. Now let's talk about becoming stronger. And continuing my love of ancient or medieval dudes saying clever things, now I have a quote from Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, who said that you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Again, apologies for sounding like a guru. I'm not trying to convince you to, I don't know, worship the moon or something, but this makes sense. In my mind, in my experience, unnecessary weakness is a huge problem. So if you ask me to take a company, especially a larger company, I mean over 50, 100 people and thousands and so on, and ask me how can you make this company more efficient, better, more innovative, more creative, more productive, whatever. Define success however you want to define it. I think that usually the things that have the most impact are looking at this kind of stuff, at the individual level, team level, and organizational level. And what do I mean by unnecessary weakness? I mean things that prevent us from doing the things that we could do, but we don't because of bullshit. There's a quote from a TV series called Fallout. You're trying to do something and thou shalt get sidetracked by bullshit. What do I mean by bullshit? Ego, insecurities, overreacting to things, corporate politics, personal conflict, all kind of anxieties, like people who are afraid to do all kinds of things. So I know a lot of people, for example, who have unnecessary weakness in the sense that they are very afraid of contradicting someone. So they end up in a conversation about something, in a meeting of some sort, and someone says something and they know that's not the right thing, they have a better idea, but they're just afraid of contradicting people because they're afraid of conflict. And that limits their ability to contribute. I know people who are very, very afraid of public speaking, for example. And not even something like this, going to a conference, but presenting something to a team of 10 colleagues. They're very afraid of that. And they might have good ideas, they might have good proposals, but they don't do that. So this becomes a kind of unnecessary weakness, unnecessary in the sense that it's not fundamental to them. They have the right ideas, they have the capability, but something is stopping them. And I think we should remove this. And how do I do that? I keep pressing a button which does something stupid. I call it the puppy method. This is my method for eliminating unnecessary weakness. Let me explain it. You have a meeting, you have a group of people, right? And they talk about something. Blah, 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 let's do this, let's do the other thing. I think we should do this, I think we should do that. You should do this, we should work together, and so on and so on. And every time I observe a conversation like this, I imagine a puppy on the table. And basically everyone has an opinion about the puppy, right? The girl on the left says, all puppies should be loved. And everybody says, that's right. And the dude on the right says, all puppies should have a home. And the guy in the back says, you're absolutely right. And then some other dude says, but what about kittens? And they keep talking for a long time. And at some point, the meeting ends, and they all go. The puppy is left there by themselves. Nobody takes the puppy home. That's always my question. When I was a manager and when I'm consulting now, I always ask who's taking the puppy home. The puppy being the issue, the decision, the work that needs to be done. Who's actually going to do something about it? A lot of people talk about other people's puppies. There should be no puppies, we should help puppies, we should love puppies, and then they go home, right? So who takes the puppy home? That's the only thing I'm concerned about in a conversation. The root cause of weakness is people thinking they did something when they did nothing. People confuse opinions with action. People confuse saying something with doing something. People confuse a lot of things with doing something. And a lot of times they don't do something. And in very bad cases, in certain companies where they have like a really cultural problem, I would say that I've seen places where like 3/4, 80% of the conversation is about nothing. It's like Seinfeld, like an episode of Seinfeld. It's just about nothing. So what I do is that I've trained myself, and I advise others as well, to quote-unquote ban, not literally ban, but from your mind, from the way you speak, the following kind of statements. When you say they should, who's they? And if you say they should, are they going to do it? Probably not, right? So avoid they should. Even worse than that is the passive voice. It should be blah, blah, blah. Okay. It should be great in the world and there should be only love between people and no conflict. I just said a great thing now. Give me likes, right? Even we is dangerous. In a way, we is the most dangerous because everybody likes to say we, right? They don't like to look selfish. They like to sound like they're talking about the team. It's we. We're going to do this. We're going to do. Who's we? Like, I like these things on the right. I will do this or I will not do that. right? That's how I like to say things. So when we're trying to do something, if we're just having a beer, whatever, but when we're trying to do something, it has to end with someone saying, I will do something. Or I will not do something. That's also great. At least we know something. And there's a chance for something to happen. Marcus Aurelius, you have power over your mind, not outside events. When you talk about they should, it should, we're talking about what other people do or don't. If you want to change other people, by all means, but then say, I will go to that motherfucker and tell him to do something different. That's good, right? Maybe you succeed, maybe you don't, but something is going to happen. If you just say he should do something different, okay. And last but not least, how to be creative. And I think this is more and more important, again, in the context of everything changing and the world is changing and everything is new and nothing is the same, and you know the story, right? We need to be creative. It's not a luxury anymore. It's not a nice to have. It's a necessity. And by creativity, I don't mean we should become painters. I mean the ability to solve problems and address situations which are maybe similar but new as well, not identical to how we've done things in the past. So we have to do something which is, we don't have a recipe for it. We don't have a procedure. How do we deal with that? That's creativity. Sometimes it's a little bit, sometimes it's a lot. Sometimes it's about something very small, sometimes it's about something big, but that's creativity. I think we all need to be creative. And I could talk about creativity for a whole day, but the example I want to give you is from Einstein, who at some point someone asked him, how were you so creative? How did you come up with so many new ideas? And he explained it in a long letter, which I'm not going to read, obviously. But what he says this in detail is this idea of combinatory play. And basically he said that he likes to explore a lot of ideas, go into a lot of different directions, try different things, and just let those thoughts combine in his brain. And at some point, something is going to connect, and poof, he's going to get an idea. And this is related to the other thing he said you might have heard of, that be curious. Right? Just let things flow. Just entertain ideas. Think about things, try things, and let it be. And at some point, a connection is going to be made. It's kind of unpredictable. It's kind of non-deterministic. You don't know when you're going to make that connection. Maybe sometimes you don't. Maybe sometimes you do. But that's how it works, right? So you have to do this kind of thing. And I also strongly believe that creativity is combinatorial. You have to train the ability to look at a thing which is unrelated to another thing and see something here which is going to help you learn something that you apply here. It's like, I don't know, Newton saw an apple falling from the tree and got the idea about creativity. Or Toyota back in the day when they were trying to come up with a manufacturing process to optimize their factories, they looked at how supermarkets in America worked and learned from the supply systems of those supermarkets, and rather than just saying, hey, this doesn't apply to us, they saw something in there and they applied it and modified it in their factories, and that became the standard manufacturing technique for 80 years, lean manufacturing. So you have to go into a situation and don't focus on what you know, but focus on what you don't. A lot of people, again, make this mistake because it's very comfortable. You look at something and you recognize parts of that something and it's, I know how to do this thing. But there's some new things as well, and it's sometimes more interesting to focus on the new things. This is why doctors misdiagnose a lot. The most dangerous kind of thing to go to a doctor with, it's a sickness that is similar but not identical to a very common sickness. And they will look at your symptoms and they will say, this checks, this checks, this checks, this checks. This doesn't check, but these check. You have this. They will jump to the conclusion because they focus on the familiar, not on what's different. And we all do that. So curiosity is the answer. It's learn to love the question more than the answer. Again, I sound like a guru. I apologize for that. Let me give you one more example. Do you recognize this bearded old guy? Anyone recognize the picture? This is Michelangelo. And I'm going to tell you the story how he ended up painting the Sistine Chapel. And it's a story about how to transform restriction into creativity, constraints into innovation, because that's what you usually have to do. Because a lot of people tell themselves like, yeah, if I had all the money in the world, and if I had all the time in the world, and if I had no worry, and if I had the perfect conditions, I would be great. No, you wouldn't. Not if you're not now. You could be, but not if you're not now. We do the things in the conditions we are, not in the ideal conditions. So this is when we need to do interesting things, not if everything were perfect. So Michelangelo was a sculptor at this point. He hadn't painted almost at all. Well, occasionally, just having fun. But painting was not a thing for him. He sculpted. That's what he liked to do. That's what he saw himself at. He was working on the funeral complex, the tomb for whatever pope was at that time. And he loved that. He was happy he got the contract to do the tomb. It was a prestigious work. He could do a lot of things, make a lot of money, and so on. There was another sculpture with the Pope that was envious of Michelangelo. And that guy wanted to actually do the tomb instead of Michelangelo. And he started talking to the Pope and telling the Pope that, you know what, I think Michelangelo should better paint the Sistine Chapel and I should do the tomb. And this was a classic case of corporate politics, plain and simple. The other guy wanted Michelangelo to fail by giving him an assignment that he wasn't good at. And he succeeded. He convinced the Pope that Michelangelo should paint the Sistine Chapel. And the Pope went to Michelangelo and told him, you should paint the Sistine Chapel. And Michelangelo was, no, I don't want to. They argued for about 2 years. There's a story that at some point the Pope even hit him with a staff over the head because he was so stubborn. Michelangelo was an asshole, by the way. He was one of the richest people in Italy. He almost never washed, so he stank. He wore very dirty clothes. He hated people. He didn't like to talk to anyone. So he's like the typical senior developer kind of individual. Right? He almost never had any apprentices because he just couldn't tolerate human presence. And this was another constraint because most other people, most other famous painters and sculptors you know about, they had like factories. They had 10, 20, 30 apprentices in their workshop. And when they did one of those big paintings you see in the museum, they kind of came up with the concept and drew the big lines and then told one guy, you paint the feet of that lady and you paint the hair of this dude. And it was like they had a lot of people working for them. He had to do it alone because he he didn't like people. It was as simple as that. But he wasn't stupid. And eventually, by refusing, he negotiated with the Pope to paint whatever he wanted in the Sistine Chapel. Because the Pope, like any client, had ideas. You know, the client has ideas. And the Pope was like, I think you should put the apostles there, and I think you should put Adam here, and Michelangelo said, just let me do my thing if you want me to do it. And there's a quote of him saying, and eventually he let me do, quote, as I pleased. Okay, and now he had to paint alone, a thing he didn't have experience with, in a technique which is in itself very constraining, which is the technique of fresco, which is they put the plaster on the walls, and in the same day, while it's still wet, you have to paint, because the paint gets into the wall and it lasts longer. But that means that you have to paint in the same day they put the plaster on the wall. And if you get it wrong, you have to take the whole thing down and put it again. Not the bricks, but the plaster layer on top of it. So it's difficult from that point of view as well. But he did it, and he turned all these constraints into creativity. And if you're wondering, why am I telling you this? Look at one thing and extract lessons that apply to a different thing. I mean, we're not Michelangelo, but we can look at this story and we can learn something that applies to ourselves as well. So I really like that Michelangelo story. What I recommend in terms of creativity is to have diverse interests. Back in the day, they had this idea of a Renaissance man. Apologies to the ladies, that's how they said it back in the day. We cannot be Renaissance people today, right? It's too much stuff to know. But that doesn't mean, I think, that doesn't mean we cannot have diverse interests. We can do different things. We can try different things. We can explore different things. I think that's where creativity comes from. And I think being hyper-specialized in something is kind of dangerous in a way. And I don't mean just in a very pragmatic way, like, on your career or something. I mean in terms of our development. And I think it's just cool to try things that are different from what you do at the job. And, basically, I recommend art and nature and sports and things like that. I think they help a lot. In closing, to be smart, strong and creative. Number one, count to 5. Obviously not, but the idea is to have self-awareness. Number 2, try to train your mind in any situation you are to just, of course you can ask questions, but when you get to a decision, just say things that start with I will or I will not. And if you cannot say it like that, ask yourself if it's worth saying it at all. And of course, some people are going to say, but yeah, you have to convince other people too, and you have to spread ideas because you spread ideas, and then the ideas, stick in people's minds. Yes, of course. I'm not trying to be absolute in what I'm saying, but you get my point. And in terms of creativity, explore different things, because combinatory play that's it. That's how you get creative, I think. And that's it, guys. That's my presentation. Do you have any questions?